Ukraine is driving southward in Zaporizhzhia. But what is actually giving the blue and yellow soldiers a leg up on the competition? It is an intellectually interesting question for those of us watching the war from the sidelines. But there is a more pressing concern if you are Russia and, you are on the receiving end of it. So, on today's edition of the Geopolitics Helpline, we launch a special military investigation into what is happening here and the problems that might come along with trying to solve Russia's woes. Recently, you said that two possible reasons for Ukraine regaining land are 1. Russian manpower issues, and 2. The Ukrainian medium-range strike campaign. In a world where Russia believes that it is the manpower issue. That sounds like the beginning of a movie trailer. In a world where Russia believes that it is the manpower issue and mobilizes more men, but it is actually the logistics strikes causing it, would it make the medium-range strike campaign more effective? As in, there are more soldiers that need more stuff delivered, but they don't receive it? Therefore, Russia has higher costs, but the increase in benefits is very little to the cost of mobilizing new soldiers? You know what? Great question. I think even just pointing out this trade-off and forcing us to pause to consider it made my day more interesting, regardless of the answers I may have later. Heck, as far as I'm concerned, we could just leave this as a homework problem for viewers. And even if we all just went home now, we would still be a little bit smarter. Like, share, and subscribe. But if you are still here, let me try to add more value to your experience today. The brief background is that Ukraine has been making inroads along the Zaporizhzhia axis. What we know for sure is that Ukraine has stepped up its counter-logistics campaign. We started discussing this about 2 weeks ago, and it has been a non-stop flood ever since then. There is certainly more to what Ukraine is doing here, especially as it relates to a squeeze on Crimea. Maybe I will work on that aspect for a later video. Simultaneously, Russia has struggled with its recruitment rates and is now net negative on men month to month. Given what we have learned over the last couple of weeks, my strong suspicion is that this is mostly a logistics issue. There is a difference between being slightly net negative on manpower and hemorrhaging soldiers. Russia appears to be in the former case. It is much harder to explain a notable reversal on the battlefield when Russian frontline commanders can react to the known, and minor, manpower issues. It is harder to react when Ukraine is constantly surprising you by bombing trucks that were carrying vital provisions. Another clue is that manpower deficits have a bit of a delay before they become directly problematic on the battlefield. Today's recruits will not reach the front line tomorrow. There is a pipeline that has to clear before Russia's numbers actually start to fall off. Now, frontline commanders ought to be aware of this as well, and will try to taper off the consequences. So it is possible to see a problem instantly, but it is indirect and should not be as severe. One final clue is that Russia continues to make advances up north, where the manpower problem is probably still the same, but the logistics problem is much better. The geography up there is a lot easier for the Kremlin. So, yes, I would bet on logistics as the cause. But in any case, let's put ourselves in some Russian boots and think about how to deal with whatever problem is there. Clearly, you have to diagnose the problem correctly to make a good decision in response. The Kremlin only has so much money to invest in the war, and actually, that is declining the more that Ukraine strikes oil infrastructure. If you invest in the wrong thing, then obviously you are not maximizing your war outcome, and the margin for error now is shrinking aside from that. For this particular problem, though, misdiagnosis might be yet worse. Doing nothing could be better than making the wrong investment. Imagine you wrongly believe that it is a manpower problem and try to solve the issue by recruiting more frontline soldiers rather than invest in truck manufacturing and truck drivers. At first, you might think to yourself, well, no big deal. There are still more men we can throw forward on our offensive. The problem is that those men need supplies, and if you are supply constrained at the moment, if you add more men to the front, you are just making everyone worse off. If troops were down to 2 meals a day, and you double the number of men out there, now everyone is on 1 meal, and none of them will be in shape to fight within a week. Plus, you just recruited the easiest set of soldiers left in the recruitment pool. When you eventually solve the logistics problem and have to go back to recruiting, you will then have to pay even more to fill the ranks. The key question that remains is whether Russia will correctly identify the problem in the first place. And at first blush, the answer should seem like an obvious affirmative. Anyone sitting on the front lines will know whether they have enough bullets left to fire, or if their team of 3 is now a team of 1 with no replacement on the horizon. But then you think about it for a minute, and you realize that, of all countries, Russia has perhaps struggled the most with relaying what is obviously true to local commanders, all the way back up to the Kremlin. After all, a local commander cannot produce more men or materiel. He needs someone higher up to give that order. We only need to rewind to the start of the war to see this problem in action. You remember, right? All of the obviously hollowed out units who tried to storm Kyiv because no one who was in a position to make an adjustment knew what was going on? So, at the risk of devolving the remainder of our time today into a lecture on Vranyo, is this the type of thing that could repeat itself? One structural answer is no. The Kremlin eventually diagnosed the communication problem that sunk the start of the war, and has sought to correct it in the middle of the war. Well, we might be skeptical about the Kremlin's success on that front. This would not be the first time that Russia understood a problem existed, tried to solve it, and failed. In fact, the corruption problems at the start of the war track with that exact path. But there is still reason to think that the men versus Materiel question is unlikely to cause the same issue. The problem before was that no one wanted to present the Kremlin with bad news. Best case scenario, you would then be responsible for having to exert the effort to fix the problem. Worst case scenario, you would be blamed for the problem and then get demoted, dishonorably discharged, or suddenly become allergic to Windows. It might be tempting to categorize the current situation in the same way. There is clear bad news on the front lines, and maybe no one wants to deliver it to the top, and maybe the top is also living in a bubble and is not looking at the same information that the rest of us have. I am skeptical, but maybe. Regardless, the military solution does not involve an acknowledgement of the bad news. At the start of the war, there was no way to fix the problem short of admitting that the troops were not ready to go. Today, it is a question of what the front line needs. It is not about presenting bad news. It is simply about telling those with broad control over the budget whether the front line needs more men or materiel. There is no admission of guilt or failure involved. If the answer is clearly materiel, like I suspect that it is, then say that. If the answer is men, then say so. Either way, you will get the category of goods that you need. Look, I am sure that we could spend a few hours creating complicated narratives where communication still breaks down for some reason. But there is a difference between possibilities here and probable expectations. In turn, I do not think that Ukraine will be getting a cheap victory here due to Russia's own folly. But that does not mean that Russia will have a free pass on this situation either. It is one thing to recognize that your logistics are fracked. It is another thing to actually fix them when Ukraine is constantly iterating on its game plan. And heck, you may not even know what Ukraine's endgame is here. Meanwhile, did you know that this is actually my secondary channel? Not too long ago, I returned to my main channel's roots and did a retrospective on the Battle of Kupiansk. I think it is neat. Maybe you will agree. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.